Today's session, as is customary, is going to be recorded, and the option for captions are also available to you, and we'll talk about that a little more. So thank you all for joining us for another session of the Buried in Treasures learning community. I'm definitely delighted to have you here. I know for most folks, this is summertime and people are either on vacation or thinking about vacation or returning from vacation, but glad that you've made the time to be here with us today. And for those who are with us for the first time, the Buried in Treasures Learning Community for 2023, supporting people addressing hoarding behaviors. I certainly wanted to give a quick overview of what the particular subject matter is. And Buried in Treasure is a monthly learning community focused on really helping people recognize and gain control over hoarding behaviors. Generally, what the group does in terms of its engagement is to discuss information and best practices and tools for self-help and gaining control of hoarding behaviors, and it's guided by the Buried in Treasure Help for Compulsive Acquiring, Saving, and Hoarding textbook. So we basically conduct this learning community using the guidance of the self-help textbook. The learning community really aims to support self-help and harm reduction for people with hoarding behaviors. And it's really designed for folks who are experiencing hoarding challenges, people who are supporting people who are hoarding, who are experiencing hoarding challenges, as well as loved ones who may be also providing that level of support. And it's really open to all Washington Foundation community support providers. What we suggest certainly is that if you're able to, is to be able to acquire the book Buried in Treasures, the second edition. And you can get that from the library or you can purchase it. I'll put that information also available to you. It's Buried in Treasures Help for Compulsive Acquiring, Saving, and Hoarding, second edition. And the information I'll be providing at the end of it. But you don't necessarily need that text if you don't have it, but it's guided by that particular text. So I want to make sure that people are aware of that. Once again, welcome. And today's session is going to be focused on Chapter 8. Really focus on efforts and successes and challenges and how to really take control of the particular focus on reducing acquiring. So it's really focused on Chapter 8. The subject matter is reducing acquiring for today's session. So welcome. Today's session, as you know, is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. And this is an interactive session. So we expect that you will engage and bring your experiences, knowledge, and skills and resources to the table and really discuss strategies and approaches to really engage in best practice and to address the issue of reducing acquiring, which as we go on further today, you will see is a major aspect of significant hoarding challenges for folks. So I hope that you really are able to kind of hone in on that and really provide some feedback as to how you are experiencing that in your particular engagement, whether that's supporting someone or addressing hoarding behavior on your own. What the slide and the recordings will be emailed to you as is normal. I've also taken the liberty of putting the information, the call-in information in the advent that you're having any challenges with your video option, as well as today's presentation and information, a copy of last month's presentation and recording. They are all available in the chat option. Is everyone able to see that information in the chat?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yes. Splendid. So moving right along, the schedules, as we know, it's a monthly schedule. So we meet certainly on Tuesdays at the same time, and we address each chapter and subject matter. Our next upcoming session will be in September or on the 26th, and it will be addressing Chapter 9, which is getting ready, really getting into that mode of preparation and action for really addressing hoarding behaviors. Today, we're going to be focused on reducing acquiring. Housekeeping, as we normally do, you have the option of the information to call in if there's concerns about getting in via video. The call-in information for the Zoom session is there. We ask that you keep yourself muted if you're not speaking directly to reduce background noise, and but you actively engage as best as you can. You can use that by unmuting or using the chat option. So make sure that's available, as well as subtitling captions are available for folks with hearing impairment. Please let me know that you are able to access that particular option. So review from last session, from July's session, we looked at really enhancing motivation. And we look at the dissonance between conception of clutter and how other people view your environment or living situation. So oftentimes there is a disconnect between how the person who's experiencing the particular environment that's impacted by clutter and how people on the outside or people who may be connected to them view those same environmental state, and how that may really impact not only one's perception, but one's motivation to make a change or determine whether a change is of interest to them or they're ready to do so. And we talked about folks being able to tell their story and really be able to give their perspective on how they've experienced hoarding and its impact on their lives in general, all the dimensions of their lives. And that information is available. Last month's presentation and recording, we can certainly go over that. What we did ask is for the learning application for this month, things that you should try or share, particular tools and approaches and strategies. We asked folks to look at the particular assessment tool of really comparing your perception with that of others, looking at your personal goals worksheet, and looking at the visual clutter and unclutter snapshots or visions, and how people can use that to get a sense as to the significance of their hoarding challenges. I wanted to get a sense if anyone has the opportunity to utilize those assessments. What are your thoughts and feedback? Was it helpful? Was it not? Did anyone get a chance to try those particular tools? And if you didn't get a chance to do so, I encourage you to really give them the try. Give them a chance to work for you, because it's important. This learning community is really dedicated not just to acquiring that information and learning the particular approaches or skills, but to try them out and bring them back to the forum so we can gauge its efficacy and how you've been able to interact with the particular tools and knowledge and skills and how they've impacted your day-to-day engagement. So we all know how busy we are, how complex our responsibilities and obligations are. But in essence, when it comes to really addressing this particular concern of hoarding, it's really a trial and error and learning and relearning and growing and evolving by practice. So this is a real practice-oriented approach. So I encourage you to really engage as best as you can. So I'm going to assume that either folks haven't tried it or don't have particular feedback about it, but I would encourage you to do so, because I think it's important for you to attempt to really help people gauge their perception of their particular condition and that of the folks in their lives, and how that may impact their, like I said, motivation, inspiration, or their willingness to really do something about the condition to change their lives or to really create a different condition that they want to exist in. So we're going to move right into today's particular subject matter, and I want to take a look first at today's learning objectives. The hope that this will be the takeaway from today's session, that you'll be able to describe excessive acquiring, know what it looks like, have a sense as to how to differentiate it from simple acquiring. What makes it excessive? What makes it instrumental or significant to someone who's already experiencing challenges with hoarding and cluttering?
Hello.
We also want to take a look at identifying strategies to addressing excessive acquiring. So once we have a sense as to what it looks like, what it really plays out in the real environment in terms of excessive acquiring, and what strategies, what approaches do we take to really address it, to ameliorate it, to minimize it, to address it in a conscientious way, to limit its impact on your overall operation, your overall life, your social functioning, and all the functionings in the different dimensions of your life. And we want to practice those steps to change. What is it we need to do to conscientiously and concretely make changes to that particular challenge of acquiring things excessively and obsessively? Does that make sense? Okay, because I want to make sure that we're doing something that's going to be meaningful and significant here. Because as we know, like with any significant behavioral challenge, it's one thing to know, it's one thing to get all the information and to feel like you're the scholar of this subject. If you don't put it into practice to get a sense as to whether or not it's going to work, it is only information. Right? And like anything else, information, just like possessions, can be hoarded. It's kind of ironic in that sense, right? You can have a whole lot of information. If you don't put it to work, it's just that stuff to clutter your brain. So we're hoping not to clutter your brain, but to give you tools that you can use magnanimously and effectively in your day-to-day operations. So let's get right into it. Right? What exactly does it mean to be excessively acquiring? And why do we focus on that, right? I think the picture says 1,000 words, right? That's what generally it may look like, but to have a sense as to what it really implies in terms of behaviors. So when we speak of excessive acquiring, we're talking about acquiring beyond utility or good use. When your acquiring is totally out of your control and is often out of your means. So when we speak to excessive acquiring, we're really focusing on those three elements. And Sheila says, when I am stressed, I do acquire. Absolutely. And we'll talk about triggers. And stress is certainly one of those triggers that leads to acquiring, but there's a whole schema of how that operates. So we want to make sure we're using it in the context and really having a good sense of it. But when we speak about excessive acquiring, we're talking about obtaining stuff beyond your utility, more than you can use. And you hear me talk about, having the 10 bottle openers and the 5 scissors and just excessive stuff that one is enough, but we just have to have, more than we can use. And really, when it's out of your control, what that means is that you're doing it subconsciously, unconsciously, or compulsively, to the extent that you are no longer processing this stuff. It's just reactionary. And then when we speak to it, and this is something that is often taken for granted, it's beyond your means, which means you are utilizing funds that should go to other essential things to acquire stuff to suit some emotional vulnerability. Sounds like a mouthful of words, right? But essentially what it means is you're obtaining stuff that you can't necessarily clearly use. You don't know whether you're going to use it as effective as you should or for the purposes intended. the way and the approach and the desire to do so is out of your control, and you really are not necessarily being frugal or appropriate in your financial dispensation to get those things. So those are the three things to remember when we talk about excessive acquiring. And this really plays out in two primary ways: buying a lot of stuff, purchasing a lot of stuff, or obtaining things for free. Those are the hallmarks of excessive acquiring. So we're talking certainly about that person going into the mall or supermarket and coming with the 4 carts and more denim jeans than you have legs for, just an excessive amount of stuff. And the more you acquire, the more it addresses the emotion that you're trying to address using acquiring. What is also important to note, and oftentimes is not necessarily a primary observation, is that oftentimes when people are excessively acquiring, they resort oftentimes to stealing. Because remember, the desire is so prominent that logic is out the window. And oftentimes people can resort to taking things without purchasing them, or even resorting to, or not necessarily resorting because it's not conscious, but their behavior can sometimes meet the criteria for kleptomania, which is that excessive compulsive kind of taking things that you can't purchase, that don't belong to you, without permission. So if I can I remind folks, if you're not,
why is this not joining in?
all right, please, if you can, I want to remind you to mute if you're not speaking directly. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. It's important to note that most people with hoarding behaviors have excessive acquiring as a constituent or as a specific element of that behavior, of the general challenge. And that's significant to note, that acquiring, it's not just a matter of having so much stuff and not willing to discard it, but people oftentimes continuously acquire to the extent that there isn't any place to put it, and it further exacerbates clutter and collection of stuff. For some people, an awareness of this excessive acquiring is available to them. They have a sense, yes. Earl, I definitely just acquire too much stuff. I buy too much stuff. I get into a mode, I go to the supermarket or I go to the store, and before you know it, I have more things than I even consciously was aware that I was striving to get or I need. For some people, though, it is difficult because they don't have a conscious understanding of their tendency to excessively acquire. It isn't clear that their acquiring is out of control. And that's even more challenging. So it's important to note those elements. And what we find is oftentimes people don't necessarily, if they're conscious of this action, they don't necessarily tell you the whole story. They certainly seldom tell you that they're stealing unless they're caught. And more times than not, they're not actually giving you an accurate reflection of how much they're obtaining for free, whether it's picking things up on the road, going to places that there's dumpsters, just collecting stuff excessively. They don't necessarily tell you that, but it's oftentimes a conglomeration of those elements that people end up in a situation where everything is out of control in terms of acquiring. But those are the primary parts of ways in which they acquire. So from your experience, have you seen this kind of multiple approaches to acquiring things to the extent that it's out of control? Have you seen that in your engagement with folks? And what does that look like?
I've seen it. I had a severe hoarding case where I was working with a woman where she was, she couldn't help herself. She just had to buy more items, and there was always a reason to justify why she made that purchase or why she brought that item home. There was always some sort of reason, and we were in the middle of trying to clean her home up to get it ready for a bed bug eradication, and she just kept bringing more stuff into the home and more stuff into the home, and it was very difficult. But always had an excuse for why she needed it. It was on sale, it was free. It was just this compulsive to constantly want to bring it in.
Spot on, and I thank you for sharing. And it's funny because, like I said, there is an element or an opportunity in some instances where people are conscious of it, and then some people are truly out of the realm of reality. It's just like, I don't even know how do I get all this stuff, right? But some people are conscious of it, but it doesn't mean a conscious awareness of it means that you have control of it. And we'll talk about what that looks like in terms of that loop that people enter in that really takes control of their lives. And I see Christina says, yes, buying groceries, picking up extra food from the hotel, breakfast, having food delivered from food banks, just an excessive quantity of food stuff. Yes, and oftentimes they rationally tell you, listen, I need this stuff. You don't know when there's going to be a famine, there's going to be food shortage, there's going to be inflation. I mean, there is enough explanation and rationalization that after a while, it bombards you to the point where you're like, okay, if you say that, I believe you. I'm not going to challenge those things. You get to the point where you can't even make an indent into the rational mind, but that happens. And Christine says, yes, people go, for extended periods, just collecting stuff. You'll see people go to the grocery store, the food bank, and every single place that they can acquire stuff. And that happens.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I know, like, in my family, it's generational, going through the Great Depression. Like, my grandma and she's like, you never know when you're going to need it. She would save every book for instructions to every appliance she's ever owned. And I do it now is like a trauma response, out of fear and stress. It's like, do I need an instruction manual for a thing that I haven't used in 5 years? Probably not, but I still have it because it gives me comfort.
And I appreciate that sharing. I mean, that's accurate. Yes, I think, like you said, it can be conditioned in that behavior is what you see, what you've learned, what you saw, give people a sense of relief or control of things, and it's easy to adapt that behavior. What's important to note is when you recognize that you are responding that way, it's not as easy to figure out what's the root causes, what are the underlying emotions, because oftentimes you practice what you see, and that just feels right because someone did it and they said it helped soothe them. So there is a whole sense of incorporating that path into your consciousness. And after a while, it begins to feel like you're relieved, right? If you believe it, it is. But we'll talk about the path that people take.
No, someone was microwaving some.
Ooh. Okay. And I don't have my marshal today to buddy me to keep control of things, but help me by muting if you're not speaking. So we're going to go through this. But I'm glad that you're able to see it, and I want you to understand what it really feels like, what it's like. So in terms of what is excessive acquiring, we've talked about it, that out of control kind of collection of stuff. How do you recognize it? Is going to be important, right? Beyond use, beyond control, and beyond your means, quite often, there is a tool that we have, it's called a saving inventory, that really helps you look at some of the emotional kind of connection to that acquisition. And I'll post these tools in the chat for you so you can use them at a later date. But what's important to note here is the areas and the focus that really brings people to this behavior, right? The question then is, how much control do you have over your urges to acquire the possession? Because it's really about responding to that urge, right? The distress or uncomfortable feeling if you do not acquire it. would it exacerbate the stress that you already experience if you don't possess something, if you don't get that victory, that feeling of, okay, I have something new, there's a novelty to what I do. So it's important to understand there is a cognitive and emotional kind of response and underlying element that you're trying to meet. Dacia says sometimes it happens when someone does without for an extended amount of time, then situation change and they have the ability to acquire things and go a bit overboard. There is some truth to that, but generally when people acquire things because they didn't have it in the past, it's specific. It has utility, right? It's not about simply acquiring for the reason to feel better. It's about acquiring purposefully, to be able to do something with it, to be able to have an action-oriented approach. So that's a distinction. So sometimes it's very difficult to discern, but it's about figuring out the path that person is taking, and we'll walk through it. So I'm hoping by the end of this session, you'll be able to get a sense as to what is that loop that takes people into that session. What is important to note is that the diagnosis of hoarding disorder includes an optional specifier, and that specifier is with excessive acquisition. So this particular specifier, it really speaks to a behavior that really is conjoined to the other challenges with hoarding in terms of not being able to discard stuff. So when we speak about excessive acquire, we're talking about that drive, that active drive to acquire more and more things, and why people engage in that. And it's going to be important to really get a sense of that, and we'll get to that in short order. And Cindy says they're often waiting for the other shoe to drop in these cases. Yes. So let's take a look at some of the factoids about this excessive acquiring. If you've been in that situation, that's what we're talking about. When you're looking at it like, how did I get here? I went there to buy one item of clothing and here I am. So about 80 or 90% of people display excessive acquiring, people who generally have a significant, statistically or diagnostically significant hoarding disorder. And 2/3 have both acquiring and discarding problems. What is ironic, though, is that most research really focus on, most of the time, the discarding difficulties. A lot of the research is not basically on the acquiring element. And think of it. Why do you think a lot of the research, or why do you think we don't focus so much on acquiring or excessive acquiring? Think about it for a moment. I want to stir up that brain of yours. Why do you think in our society, we don't see excessive acquiring so much as an aberration or a problem as we should? Cindy's hit it. Marketing. We are a consumer society, right? Acquiring things is a reflection of status, right? What we can have, what we can acquire speaks to our capacity, our ability. It really harkens back to our focus on who we are based on what we have, right? And Christina hit it. Acquiring is practically an American value. Absolutely. And we do it in some form. This is similar, and I say this to folks, and I want you to take it within context. This is similar to someone shifting from simply, and I hate to do that to you, Cindy, because I know you're eating. I was eating a few minutes ago, so this is not spot on you. But it's a simple shift from eating, what we normally do, to disordered eating, right? It's very difficult to make that shift and that discernment because it's something we have to do. We can't go without eating. So it's not as though you can be like, I just avoid eating and I don't have a problem. You'll have a problem. You'll be going to the undertaker. So that's not going to solve your problem. So it's similar in terms of excessive acquiring. We can go from acquiring based on need in our lives to really getting to a point where we're serving another purpose acquiring is serving another purpose, is not to meet our needs. And that's important to note. Excessive acquiring results oftentimes in more severe psychopathology. So when excessive acquiring is part of that person's hoarding behavior, it tends to reflect more significant psychopathology. What does that mean? People who tend to excessively acquire as part of their hoarding framework tend to have more serious issues and problems beyond simply hoarding. So you find more severe hoarding disorder, earlier onset, there's an earlier onset of hoarding challenges, and there's more significant distress. General impairment in functioning, social impairment, there's more anxiety, there's oftentimes more depression, and oftentimes there may be elements of obsessive compulsive behavior. So oftentimes when we see excessive acquiring as a primary component of that person's hoarding behaviors, it tends to signal greater or more severe psychopathy, more severe challenges. It's a harder case to crack, so to speak. Because like I said, you're asking someone to change a behavior that is necessary simply because it's gone to the extreme. To pull that person back on track, it's just not as easy as simply saying we have to remove some of this clutter. So it's just important to understand that. So this is what's important to note. If the one takeaway I want you to have is this today, which is understanding the compulsive acquiring process. Typically, an acquiring episode begins with an emotional vulnerability, right? Someone can simply be in a state where they're feeling down, but they have great anticipation and delight about the trip to a flea market, right? That sense of victory, that sense of acquiring something, that sense of power, that sense of ownership of stuff. Or the person may be experiencing some feeling of anxiety or feeling overwhelmed, because different people react to different emotional states. But oftentimes, that process of excessive acquiring begins with an emotional vulnerability. And then it's followed by triggers. While in that emotional vulnerable state, a cue or a trigger can really set people off, right? What you see, what you hear or experience, that person can just go through a period where they're seeing something. Like you're feeling down and you pass a store with some fantastic shoes. And before you know it, you're like, oh my goodness. If I just step into that new pair of shoes, I'll feel so great, right? I'll feel elevated. I'll feel like I'm new. I can actually feel like I'm having a positive experience in my life. And that's maybe the single cue that a person needs. So that's it's the emotional vulnerability, then the trigger. And then typically once that person experiences that trigger, what follows is thoughts, those thoughts about how wonderful it would be to acquire something new, right? Or if the person is down or have really negative emotions, they may see acquiring something as helping them feel better. And not just feel better, they may think, listen, when I'm feeling sad, I deserve to have something. Because I have no business feeling, I'm a good person. Why am I feeling sad? And if I'm feeling sad and I'm a good person, then I deserve to feel better. And by acquiring something, I can feel better. And therefore, by acquiring it, I deserve to acquire it. See that cycle? And that's where it starts. And before you know it, you're on the racetrack. Because once you are able to make that kind of emotional rationalization or connection, then what typically happens when those thoughts become prominent is that there's an immediate emotional payoff, right? When you acquire the stuff, it has an immediate impact on your feelings of, you feel relief, you feel a feeling of joy. It's the payoff. And that payoff is what hooks you. I call it, that's the crack of hoarding, that payoff. Because once you get it and you feel good, what happens the next time you have a sad mood or you're down? you acquire something. Or you don't even wait until you have a sad mood. You anticipate that you can have a sad mood, and before, in the anticipation, you look for the solution to the problem, right? And the way you do it is, if I feel bad, I typically buy something that I feel good. So if I know there's a likelihood that I'm going to feel bad and I buy that stuff, I'm feeling good before I even have to experience the bad feeling. See that scenario? So if you're experiencing some conflict with your better half or your friend, and you anticipate, oh, the minute I have this conversation, life is going to suck. I'm going to feel terrible after this conversation. So what do? I know what makes me feel good. Get a new set of jeans, set of shoes. So I go get it before I have the conversation, because I know the conversation is going to lead to bad feelings. And after you have the conversation, you realize, hold on a minute, I still feel bad. So if one pair of jeans didn't do it, 2 may, or 3 may. Or if I can't buy them, maybe I go to Goodwill and use that same $40 and get 5. Because 5 times the happiness is 5 times the happiness in your mind. So that's the kind of cycle when the emotional payoff, and you hit that emotional payoff and you start responding. What we know is that most immediate emotional payoff don't last long. And after we get that payoff and it starts dwindling and it starts lessening in its impact, we start feeling that sense of regret. The high is gone. Regret kicks in. We start thinking, oh, there, all the money I spent getting those 5 pair of jeans, now I can't pay my rent. And I don't even have a place to put them. The drawer that I have all my jeans is packed beyond recognition. And it's going to contribute to more clutter. Then I have to feel bad, because the next time I see my caseworker, they're going to ask me, why did I get more stuff when I can't even get rid of the stuff? And then you go through that whole cycle. So when the regret kicks in, you start feeling poorly about yourself, emotional down spiral, you feel negative, sad again. And on top of that, it's easy to then decide if I'm feeling terrible because I feel like I did something that was supposed to help me, but it didn't. All it led to is negative emotions. Then there must be something wrong with me. Right? And you start drawing negative conclusions about yourself. I'm weak. There is something wrong with me. For me to actually engage in this behavior when I know it doesn't work, I know it makes me feel sad, I know I'm going to get talked about, I know I'm going to get admonished by my friend or parent, there must be something wrong with me for me to be going through this cycle. And when that occurs and you feel that poorly again, what do you do when you feel poorly? That helps, even for a moment. You go buy something. So in order to deal with that full scale of emotional down spiraling, you actually, and that vulnerability, you start that whole cycle again. You go and you acquire again, and you go through that whole process of the triggers and the thoughts and the payoff and the regrets, and people live in that cycle oftentimes. So understanding that cycle is going to be important to helping someone really address those challenges. So that's the one significant takeaway that you should. And what we typically do is when we understand that we're dealing with all of those challenges and triggers and emotional ups and downs, the first thing that comes to mind as a solution is maybe if I just avoid everything that gets me to clutter, I will be okay. Just think of it. If you're in love and you get your feelings hurt, doesn't it make you a little more cautious about approaching any kind of romantic stuff again? Yes, it does. So you sometimes tell yourself, listen, the only way to not get hurt in love is to do what? Not get in love. That's it. Simple. Easy solution. If that has worked for anybody, let me know. It hasn't worked for me. Doesn't work. Can't avoid those kind of emotional necessities in life. So we approach it using the common thing that we do. We avoid it. Avoidance is a rational, practical, immediate response. Right? We avoid the places that we normally go to acquire stuff. If we don't go to the flea market, we don't go to the store, we don't go to the mall, we don't go to anything that there's stuff, then we avoid it. It abates the issue for a bit. So typically you'll hear people say, well, if you don't go to the Saturday morning yard sales, everything will be fine. Find something else to do. If your hook is the yard sales, then don't go. If that's your trigger, then don't go. Find something else to do. And this may sound rather hilarious, but oftentimes when you tell someone who has a compulsive behavior not to do something and to find an alternative without really processing their emotions, the response is typically, yes, I'll find something else to do. I don't go to the yard sale, but I'll go to the library. And what happens when you go to the library eventually? Generally, you take out 2 books, then 4, then 6, then 8, then 10, and you find, hold on a minute, I can acquire right here without having to spend money. Right? The fines are not that bad. They're not going to come after me. Have you heard anyone in the federal court having to pay library fees because they have 50 books out? No, it seldom happens. But it's a lovely way to acquire new things without having to spend money. And you're also saying to most of the folks in your life, listen, I'm not going to the yard sales, so why are you bugging me about going to the library? Because you're coming out to the library with 10 books. And they have to tell you, remember, the limit is only so many, but you come back every day. If you get 4 every day, before you know it, you're hoarding library books. So it's important to understand that's a short-term solution. It may work in the short term, but at the end of the day, you need to have an approach that really helps you control this. Control the urges, control your responses in order for you to address the situation well. So we know that avoidance in the interim helps, but you have to be on a path that is more comprehensive and well thought out than simply avoiding in order to really take control of excessive acquiring. It's not a long-term solution. So there's 4 processes or 4 steps to changing acquiring in the long term. And these are very clear and definitive. It is important to discover what, how, and why you acquire. Understanding the what, the how, and the why helps you to address the root causes, the root challenges. Step 2, changing your thoughts about acquiring. Really focusing on those thoughts to drive that process and changing those thoughts. We're talking about some cognitive behavioral strategies to really help you address those thoughts that lead you down that road. And learning to tolerate your triggers to acquire, because triggers are exactly that. They're not the bullet, they're not the gun, they're actually the triggers. You can actually, if you don't pull that trigger, you don't go down that road. So you have to be able to recognize the triggers, learn how to mitigate them before you respond automatically to the triggers. And ultimately, you have to develop alternative sources of joy and coping. And Cheryl says, yes, it's like any other addiction. You really have to understand your triggers and really be able to find alternative sources that really responds to your emotional needs. So you're not using the compulsive behavior to actually soothe or self-soothe. You're finding meaningful, healthy alternatives to acquiring. Does that make sense? So it's really about understanding the thought process, the emotional stuff, understanding that response loop that you go through and addressing that early.
If it's somebody else who doesn't want to.
So let's go through those steps and see how we get there. How do we make those changes? Step 1, discover what, how, and why you acquire. It's going to be important for people to put some work in. You have to track everything that comes in and pay attention to the feelings for at least a week. And there's a form that you can use to do so to help you really look at how you acquire and why you acquire over a period of time so you can actually gauge it and really examine it, right? You list everything that you got and how you got it. Did I buy this? Did I pick this up? You know, and you have to be honest to some degree. Did I actually steal this? And what are the ramifications and processes of that? And how comfortable would it feel if you didn't get it? On a scale of 0 being I'll be okay to 10, I'll feel awful. If you're able to do that, you're able to really take a look conscientiously at the driving thoughts that lead you to the behavior. So this is an important form to really be able to utilize to really get a sense as to how you're reacting. Because this moves you from being proactive, from being reactive to proactive, by really understanding the drivers, the emotional states, the feelings, the thoughts that really move you in a direction of acquiring to help you moderate or manage emotional vulnerability. So it's important to acknowledge that, to be aware of that, and to really gauge it, to measure it, to look at it. You track everything that comes in for 2 weeks. And it will really also track your emotional responses to those things. And you'll see what is the hardest item to actually resist, because that's what you want to know. What's the item or the possession that is the hardest to resist? So you can determine where you need to focus most of your energies and change behavior. So that's going to be step number 1. And then you'll take a look at advantages and disadvantages. What is that item? And what is the advantage of acquiring that item? Once you have to speak truth to that feeling, it's a different thing than simply reacting. Because if you get that, particular shoes, you're like, what was the benefit of me acquiring these shoes? Now, you can speak like I do often and say, this particular pair of shoes fit me fantastic. I can walk like a man on the moon with this particular pair of shoes, right? And it makes sense in that moment. And if you're able to acknowledge that, then you'll ask yourself, well, what's the disadvantage? What was the cost? Darn it, I'm out of $80 that I can use to pay my mortgage. That's going to be a tough one, right? And I know, like, some folks will say, well, it was on sale. That's fine. But the last time I saw sale, it still has a price. So if you got that $120 shoes for $60 and you felt like you just won the lottery, you have to take into consideration that you're $60 out of your grocery shopping account. It's $60 that you can't buy a bus pass, a train pass. It's $60 that you can't, put aside in your savings for when you can't work. It's all those things you have to take into consideration. So you have to look at the advantages and disadvantages of acquiring. So you're really now focusing on everything that you acquire. You're evaluating it based on its significance and importance in your life, as well as its impact on your life. What is the give and take for having it? So we're really getting down to the root causes, the emotional elements of that. Now, step 2 is once we understand those thoughts, we now have to do what? We have to make some changes to that thoughts, right? Because that's the cognitive behavioral concept. We understand the thoughts that lead us and we change it. Because nothing can change if we don't engage in change behavior. And change behavior starts with change thoughts, right? We have change thoughts, then we actually speak it, we articulate it, change talk, and then change action. So that's the triumphant. The 3 elements of that, the thoughts, then we have to look at the actual feelings, and then we look at the behavior in order to change it. And we spoke about the acquiring loop, right? The triggers, and then the emotional payoff and the regret that kicks in, and then the negative conclusions about ourselves, and then we tend to go back to coping by using acquiring. And that's important to understand those thoughts. You have to, what we call, interject at some point here. And what's important to note is that to gain control of your acquiring, you must find a way to change your responses to the first 3 steps of the compulsive acquiring process. That is the emotional vulnerability. We have to look at it concretely. We have to look at the triggers that follow. And then we have to look at, are we using an immediate emotional payoff to address that emotional vulnerability? And at some point, we can change it in those 3 steps. It may be effective for us to stop at the minute we recognize those triggers. We know what they are, and we know that we shouldn't be responding automatically to them. So we pursue that end by beginning with the thoughts that make the acquiring more likely. The first thing we stop at is, okay, I know that I'm feeling poorly, I'm feeling sad. I understand that, me getting up and getting to my car and going to the mall to, collect my thoughts is not a good idea. Because you don't collect your thoughts at the mall, you collect stuff. So you know that cannot be your next step after you feel that way. Or even if we get to that point, we know we are here at the mall putting our hands on that stuff because we want that immediate emotional payoff. But we know what about immediate emotional payoff? They are short-term. They don't last very long. So we know within the next day, week, or whatever, we're going to be back here in what we call the shoddy emotion, right? We're going to be right back there. So we're only alleviating it momentarily. And Savage says, hoarding behaviors that it can be a safety net and hiding place. It is what they find comfort in this world. Yes, it can be a way of hiding and avoiding the actual need to address the emotion that you have to address. So it's important to understand that loop. So we look at what's your most recent acquiring episode. We ask people to go back. The last time you acquire some things, we want you to consider by revisiting that particular episode. The whole acquiring trip, we want you to revisit it. I want you to look at the beginning emotion that set you on that path to that trip. What were the triggers? What were the thoughts that made it more likely? What do you think was the immediate emotional experience after acquiring it? So you're going through that entire loop of compulsive acquiring and really processing it to see what is it you experience, what you feel, what you emote, why you behave in that response. Why is that so automatic? How do we change the automatic response? At what point do we intervene while we're going through this path? And you need to do that by actually going back and revisiting a trip. Because it's difficult to do when you're doing it as a preempt to something that you're going to do. Because the one thing about most compulsive behaviors is what? Our thoughts lie to us. We can't even trust our own thoughts. So you need to actually look at something that was already happened and evaluate it, because you can't but avoid what happened. It has happened already. Because you can always promise yourself, oh, no, there weren't. When I go to the mall, it's not a trigger, right? No, it's not a trigger. The mall is actually a nice place. I get the best coffee at the mall. The bun and the cake at the mall is fabulous. It's better than anything else. You come up with all kinds of reasons why the mall is perfect. Oh, I get my best workout at the mall because I don't even realize when I get my 3,000 steps. And you're like, hold on a minute now. Did you go to the mall to get steps in? No, that was not your original idea. But that's a byproduct, or that's a great byproduct. No, it's not really a byproduct, because the reality is you did acquire things that you didn't need. So even though you got some steps in and you have great, fabulous, stamina, you also have less money in your pocket, less bills to pay, and you're bringing home stuff that you don't have space for, room for, and it's actually making your situation that you're trying to address worse. So we understand that. We're not going to play that game. So, but it's important for people to actually have to take a look at each one of those steps in that loop and examine it for what it is and come to grips with the reality of why and the what. And then once we understand that, we have to set some rules for ourselves. We know we can't keep doing what we're doing, and wherever we intervene is going to require some rules for us to stop. Because I always think of it in that sense. If there were no stoplights, wouldn't we all be driving like bat out of hell? Yes, we would. Because we all would wait until 2 minutes before the time and just get there because we're going to speed. So there's a reason why there's rules to stop you from doing certain things so that you can check yourself. And that's the same thing with hoarding. We have to kind of get into that mode to really check yourself. So the simplest, most straightforward way to think differently while prompted to shop requires to establish a firm set of rules to go by. And the best way of doing that is really using some that are already in place that has been tested. I set firm rules to go by, and the example of one of them is I cannot get this particular thing unless I plan to use it within the next month. I have enough money right now to pay for it. Now, someone is going to say, Earl, so what if I put it on a credit card? Well, that's smart, but it doesn't help you because you don't have enough money to pay for it now. It's not expendable, right? You're kind of creating a cost right now that you have to pay for in a bit. You have to ask yourself, or at least make sure you're using the caveat that, do I have a place to put it so it doesn't add to my clutter? And in most instances, if you already have a cluttering issue, you can't say that this is going to be fitted into some space that is not already cluttered. I'm sure I truly want this and will not return it, because that's another aspect of excessive acquiring that people engage in that actually serves the short-term process. Okay, I feel poorly. I go get this stuff. I get a high. I feel good about it. When the regret starts kicking in because I look at my bank account and I see that there's zero for my rent, then the best response I can do is, oh, if I just take them back and get my money back, then I would be back to my financial stable self, but I would have already gotten the emotional uplift from purchasing. What happens eventually? If you keep returning things and buying them and returning them and buying them and returning them, likely the store is going to say no more returns for you. This is not happening. Or the benefit of possessing it is going to be greater than your ability to return it. Miriam says, which is why they usually take your name each time you return things. Absolutely. And stores are getting a lot more effective in seeing people who do that kind of recycling things consistently. Now, what is also helpful is to really look at, do I truly have a need, or is just a wish for this item? And that need speaks to, can I utilize it in a meaningful way in my life that really adds value to my life and allow me to use my space in the intended way? Because if this is your 10th shoe and you then have to go get another spot to put this additional shoe in it, that's not the purpose that you're using that room. That's not the intended purpose of that bedroom that you have full of shoes. It was supposed to have a bed and you were supposed to be able to relax in it. It wasn't intended to have shoes collected that you're not even using. So you have to understand whether it's a need or not. Then, even if you have those rules, as we know, rules are meant to be broken. So we then have to have a second layer. Questions that challenge your thinking. And those questions are, do I already own something similar? Now, I have a great friend of mine that had major hoarding challenges tell me, Earl, every blue jeans has a different dye, a different hue, a different connection. So you can't tell me that because it's similar, it's the same. No, that was a fantastic rationalization. Because there's like 100 different versions of blue, right? And every jeans, even if it's the same brand, same size, maybe dyed a little differently. What I ask him is how many did he have more buttocks than the actual human being to wear all those jeans at the same time? I was waiting for him to rationalize that one. He says, no, no, I don't. I just like, different jeans on the weekend, different jeans in the daytime. I said, okay. Because if you're walking around with 65 buttocks, then fine, you can wear, 35 pairs of jeans. But generally, you can only wear one at the same time, unless you're double layering or whatever, which is kind of tough to do in the summertime anyway. You're going to be hot as hell. So there's a way of actually mitigating that rationalization. Am I buying this because I feel bad right now? Critical question. I would say even go further, because people are not always honest about good or bad feeling, right? Can you tell me what is the specific emotion you're experiencing right now that leads you to buy this stuff? The person says, I feel sad, right? Or I feel anxious, or I'm stressed. And that's it. If you're buying that, you have to let folks know you cannot buy the fixing emotion. There is no fixing emotion in the mall. Or am I mistaken? I can't remember ever going to a mall and see happiness being sold there. What they do is to tell you that buying this stuff is going to make you feel happy. What they also don't let you know is if it doesn't make you feel happy, you can come back and get your money back and the happiness that they promise you. So sometimes you have to make it really a practical conversation. Listen, if you feel this thing is going to make you happy, what if it doesn't make you happy? You can only take it back. You're still going to not feel happy when you take it back. Will I regret getting this in a week? Likely, because you have 50 pairs of them already that you can't wear. And looking at it, simply knowing that you possess it doesn't make that negative emotion go away. And can I manage without it? It's the big question. Can I manage without it? Because if that person says, Earl, when I wear a new pair of jeans and a new pair of shoes and I go out, I feel good about myself. People look at me differently, makes me feel differently. The last time I get that response, I said to someone, follow me, let's go into your closet. And when you pointed out in their closet, they had about 12 pair of jeans that they had tags on that they never wore. So I said, of these 12 that has tags on, aren't they all new? Choose one of them and put yourself in it and go around the same neighborhood that's going to give you that good emotion. And you're there. You don't have to buy another one. You already have stuff that you haven't even worn. Or sometimes just going through them and seeing something gives you the same temporary elation that you would have had going to the mall. So there's ways of mitigating them and without actually, unfortunately, or impractically costing yourself more money by acquiring again. Enough time to fix, use, or other priorities. So you have to think of all of those elements. So there's a litany of questions that you can ask yourself that really spur you to think beyond the immediate emotions, as well as a set of rules to follow that helps manage your acquisition and help you focus on your goal of decluttering. Because this is what it's all about. In the early aspects of this, we ask people to establish some goals that they intend to focus on for this whole approach to changing their behavior. And you have to harken back to the goals. You have to bring people back to the goal. Your goal was to actually declutter. Do you think going on this shopping spree is going to aid you in that effort to reach that goal? And oftentimes the answer is no. So what do we do if we can't use our conditioning, the go-to response to make us feel better? We have to find a way to really address those thoughts and emotions. Now, for those who may have experienced hoarding themselves or assisting someone or supporting someone, do you have a set of rules that you've seen people use or set for themselves? And of these questions, what would you ask yourself, or what do you think you should ask your consumer that you think is going to really help in the process of having them stop a moment and think through their responses? Do you see these rules or questions helping that person to stop a moment? Sheila says something in, something out. I'll tell you that in the interim, in the early phases, something in, something out helps. But when someone is really significantly impaired by hoarding, it is hard to do that something in, something out. Because as we know, when you're there, they'll put something out, and then when you're not there, what will they do? They either go replace it. Great response, Sheila. They throw out a piece of paper. So something that is expendable, something that you can actually get rid of. And we'll talk some more about what it means to take things out. Put it in the recycle bin the night before, so the recycle is gone, so you can't go back and rummage through it when the case manager is gone. We're talking about really putting it away in the right way. So do you see any of these questions spurring someone to really think before they act, or some of these rules that you think can apply to some of your consumers? Christina says, we do try to make a schedule for donating items, something to plan on and prepare for. Absolutely, yes. And we'll talk some more about the action of really doing that, discarding. There's an entire program of discarding, very concrete guidelines. So we're not going to go on the break because we're up against the clock. I want to add, this is a tool that we're going to ask you to share with your consumers or use for people who are experiencing hoarding themselves, the non-acquiring help card. So it basically establishes a goal and rules and questions. So it's, what's my goal for reducing acquiring? The person may have some specific goal. One of my goals is to be able to utilize my living room in the way it's intended. Another goal may be to make my house welcoming to my social company, the people that I normally haven't seen in years because I don't feel comfortable with them coming to my place. So if I'm able to kind of create a living room and an area that they can come and meet, great, I can get back to my social engagement. Or another rule may be, I want to make sure that I maintain my residency. I want to pass the home inspection, the housing inspection, and I need to have certain things in place in order to pass that inspection. And you have a reasons why you want to achieve these goals, right? I want to stay living in the community. I don't want to end up homeless. I want to have friends and company. I love the social engagement. I want to use my home in a way that I haven't used it in years. And then you establish some rules. You can't acquire anything unless you can use it within the next month, or these other rules. And then these are questions that you will ask yourself when you feel the urge or the trigger to acquire. Ask yourself these questions, make sure you answer it concretely before you act. What we ask people to do is to fill out this form as concretely as you can, print it out and carry it with you. So that whenever that urge hits you or you experience a cue, you can look at that card and remind yourself of your own guidance as to how you should operate in a world, in a space where you feel emotionally vulnerable. Does that make sense? It's like the person who is dealing with substance use addiction having that card that keeps them on track, right? You know, when I experience an emotion that I can't deal with, I feel overwhelmed, I said a serenity prayer, or I call my sponsor. Same element, same concept here. You go back to the things that keep you grounded, the rules that guide you, and the questions that should help you clarify whether or not your action is going to be meaningful and purposeful in keeping with your goals. Important to use, and I'll make sure I provide that to you so you'll have the links to all of these tools that you can use. I would say if any of the cards, any of the instruments you should use, this is a great one to give your consumers, have them fill it out and carry with them. So that when that Saturday comes and the itch to go to that yard sale comes, they can look at this and be like, oh, do I really need to do that? Would this comply with my guidelines and rules I set for myself? Important. Because as we say, this is all about practice and figuring out what works for that person. Empowering that person to become more self-directed and autonomous in their behavior, their thoughts, their emotional reaction, and their feelings that drive those actions that lend themselves oftentimes to acquisition. So as we know, there's a number of triggers to hoarding. And there is one I want to share with you that I was just blown away by. Generally, we know a great prominent trigger is emotional vulnerability, right? You're feeling sad, you're feeling happy, you acquire. You try to use acquisition or gathering things to address emotional ups and downs. Online shopping, accessibility, utility, you know, it's there, it's going to show up at your doorstep the next day. You have Prime, you have Amazon Prime, which means they'll probably drop it off with a bird or something, and you feel like you can just have it when you want it, right? It's so accessible to you. And this impacts primarily seniors or people who haven't had that opportunity in the past. It's so novel. It's so remarkable. I don't know about you, but to this day, even though I live in this era, I live in this time, I still feel blown away by the fact that I can click 2 buttons and get something at my doorstep in a day. It's remarkable. It reminds me of when you was a kid, you wonder, how does a plane fly? How does that heavy metal thing fly in the air like a bird? I still am flabbergasted by the online shopping element, that you can actually do click, 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 and something is at your door. Fascinating. So for a number of folks, that is a novel thing. And you think of elderly folks who can't sleep late at night and watching all the infomercials and all that stuff. And it's like, oh yes, this is the blender that is going to make that particular shake that is going to make you healthier than an ox, and you buy it. And next thing you know, half of the blender's falling apart in a week, right? Or you have 15 blenders already, but this one is supposed to do some magic. The last time I saw a blender that made an orange and apple, that's when I'm going to buy it. And I don't see anyone that does that. It's the same thing as blending. So I don't know why one is going to be better than the other. But this is the world we live in. We're bombarded by messages of infinite utility and everything is going to be perfect, right? Think of all the lotions and moisturizers that were supposed to make our skin smooth as a baby's bottom. How often does that work? We have 15 versions of them and we still have to be moisturized. It's like the moisturizer, once you moisturize and you're set for the rest of your life, probably you'll get me. Other than that, it's just another thing to fill an emotional gap that you have to make you feel better. I know it's propaganda, absolutely. It really doesn't work, but we still respond to those messages. But the one that I wanted to share with you as most prominent is the Little Shop of Hoarders. Have you ever heard of that? I actually went to upstate New York, where I go just get away from stuff. It's actually in Brant Lake, New York, upstate New York. And I was driving past the ice cream shop, and I saw this store that says Little Shop of Hoarders. I could have fallen through a hole in that moment. I said, it's a novel idea, but how cruel this is. If you're a hoarder and you see a shop that says Little Shop of Hoarders, the first thing is like, oh, hold on a minute. I didn't know we have an association. I didn't know we have a group that's just dedicated to us specifically. It's awful, but I understand the concept of it. So this shop is in Illinois. This particular one, it's unbelievable to me. It's in Chillicothe, Illinois, and it's called the Anti-Throwaway Culture. I said, oh my goodness, people are phenomenal. Anti-throwaway culture. Isn't that what we call cluttering? Precisely. But if you sell it and you package it that way, it's unbelievable. I said, what's next? We're going to hear about, a leg fracture as a fragmentation of your limbs. I don't care what you call it. It's the same outcome. Good Lord Almighty. But that's where we are. So look out for the little shop of hoarders and let your consumers know there's actually what, and just make sure that they understand that this is not supposed to attract you to it because it is. Exactly, there's a line between conservation and clutter, and it's very fine. This one, the line is just blurred. But it's you imagine a hoarder going into this store and saying, whoop, I have found my heaven. It's unbelievable. It's remarkable. I guess we can say the same thing about most addictions. Somebody is going to use it to sell a game. But it was just phenomenal for me to see it. I'm like, I cannot believe this, but truth is in the pudding. So it was there. So step 3 is to really learn how to tolerate your triggers, right? You know the triggers. You want to be able to create a hierarchy of non-acquiring. And what does that really mean? You want to list all the triggers that you can, all the triggers that you know about, and rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, least to most discomfort. So if you know your triggers and you know the ones that are prominent for you, then you're able to plan how to address them, right? And the way we do that is using some exposure therapy. You want to plan to practice, you want to expose yourself gradually to these triggers on your list. You may even want to consider using a chaperone, someone to go with you to keep a record of discomfort every 10 minutes or whenever you notice a change. Because you're trying to actually expose yourself to the triggers and not acquire or buy, and see that not acquiring doesn't automatically make you feel bad. Bad things doesn't happen because you don't respond to those urges. You want to acquire, you want to become stronger at exposing yourself to each trigger. So this is a very practical but very delicate one. You want to be very careful when you're doing this. You want to be guided by good practical clinical substance in doing so. Because you have to think of you want to ask that person, what is the situation that's going to trigger you to acquire? What's your most prominent trigger? For some folks, it's, I just can't drive by a yard sale. That's it. My car just turns, the wheel turns on its own. I don't even have control. I'm just in the yard before I know it. Then you want to have a sense as to how you expose yourself to that, right? You don't want to go to the large ones. You want to go to the small. You want to actually deal with it in a way. You want to go there, you may go through things, not buy it. Expose yourself to it and realize that you can leave there, get back into your car and drive home, and your life didn't end. You didn't feel like you were going to die. It was just a momentary emotion that you actually was able to tolerate. And an example in the book is that Bill's non-acquiring hierarchy. So we had Bill go through his hierarchy, and he rated them in terms of the urge and discomfort. So for him, the one that leads to the highest discomfort, which is his most significant trigger, was picking up a treasure that someone has left on the curb. So for him, that was the most prominent one. And that was followed by picking things up at a dollar store without buying. That was his most tough trigger to control. So it's important to have someone actually identify their triggers and really discern which one is the most prominent and gradually try to expose them to the least discomfort in triggers so they become more and more accustomed to actually facing those triggers and not having to respond. Does that make sense? Does that Is that something you can see being operationalized to help someone really actually face those elements without feeling that they're not able to? Fantastic. Because at the end of the day, we can't avoid every single trigger. We just have to learn how to tolerate them and recognize that our emotion is controlled by us. And we don't necessarily, we could actually gauge, design, and respond in a way that we intend to. It is not necessarily automatic. It's not compulsive. Because we know what it is that we're trying to address. If I know I am trying to feel better than the sadness that I'm currently feeling, I also know that acquiring something is only going to temporarily make me feel good. I'm going to be back in this feeling the minute that stuff is joined with the other clutter that I have. So I have to find a more tangible, substantive way of doing it, of addressing that emotion. And we do that by recognizing the signs that you are triggered. What are some of the emotion, the physical sensations you feel? Sweaty palms, heavy breathing. What are some of the judging thoughts that come into your head when you're exposed to a trigger? You start blaming yourself for a situation. You find fault with the person or things that trigger you, right? Why did they have to actually put this mannequin out here with the shoes that they know that I want? You can't blame someone else. You can actually pass it and look at it and be like, I don't need that right now. What is the defensiveness that you use? Right? You find yourself pleading your case, justifying yourself, marshaling those arguments. Oh, I have a right to actually get a new set of whatever because I deserve it. I worked hard this week. No one can tell me why I shouldn't actually reward myself, right? But it's going to add to your clutter. So you have to be able to recognize the signs that you're triggered. And then what you want to do is how to shift your state once you've actually been triggered. The most important thing is to name that trigger. The sooner you notice your trigger, I am triggered by seeing this particular stuff. Take space appropriately. Don't act when triggered. Find something relatively graceful way of removing yourself. You know what? I know if I just stay here and I look at this particular item in this flea market, I'm going to end up taking it home. I'm going to go shift from the flea market. I'm going to walk a little down the street, go to the farm stand, spend some time talking to someone there about something or do something otherwise. You shift your state. Use any range of state shifting tools, and there's a number of state shifting tools that we can use. And one is my favorite. When you're feeling emotionally down, where I come from, we simply find the finest cup of tea and drink it. That whole warm rush can change your emotional base. So you can take a cup of tea and just sip it, experience that whole taste, be mindful about the cup, the smell of the tea, the taste of the tea, the warmth of the tea, all of that you can go through. Right? If that doesn't work for you, you can do some vigorous exercises. You can turn on your music and dance to the song that you danced that when you were 16 years old. You went to the first Sweet 16 party that you'll never forget. You can actually get in that mode. For some people, meditation may be the source of shifting your emotions, right? Or self-soothing. Listen to some music, walk, call a friend, talk to someone who really suits you. Many ways of doing that. And respond to the situation rather than react. Important. Deal with it. Look back at the original situation that triggered you. Is there something that needs to be done or not? Do you really need to act on this feeling in the moment? If you choose to act, you can assess the situation, get clear on your goals, and plan how best to achieve your goals. Only then do you act. Is this going to help me get to the point where my house can be used for the purpose that I want it to? I can actually regain my social circle by actually having a welcoming space. I can maintain my housing by passing my inspection and not having be evicted. I actually can safeguard myself by not having the Department of Health come in and say my house is actually, unfit for human safety or whatever. So understand your goals and actually go through that process of recognizing and shifting your state when you're triggered. And finally, you need to develop alternative source of enjoyment, because it's all about doing things that work for you from an emotional standpoint. Find a replacement activity in and out of your home. If you're not acquiring, then what? What do you do? Find activities that replace enjoyment and acquiring provides. Read a book, take a walk, watch a movie, do something that actually stands in the place of what acquiring would do. Brainstorm a list of choices. What's most doable? A short list of choices, particularly ones that can be done at a moment's notice, right? And decide on a mixture of things. What can be done at home, what can be done outside of the house, and post that list on your calendar, on your refrigerator, or on a notable place, and assign yourself some of these tasks. On Tuesday, I will actually take a walk in the local park because I feel in a good place when I'm walking. I know I do that. It helps me manage my triggers. On Saturday, I know all the flea markets are there. I need to do something meaningful, significant, that spurs my positive emotion on Saturday so I don't have to resort to going to the flea markets to feel good. Visit your friend that you like on Saturday. Make some cookies, whatever. Use your actual kitchen to make some cookies. Post and assign favorite activities and rank them by enjoyment. Which one brings you the greatest enjoyment? Which one you tend to respond to immediately? That's the one you should be using. And Sheila says, someone who isn't listening, they're not engaged in learning this. Then how do we reach them? Great question, Sheila. The reality is we reach people first and foremost where they are. Help them recognize the reality of their situation. Then use whatever means you can, the most practical, straightforward means to inspire them, to motivate them. Someone who is right on the head. Sabrina, motivate them. How would you see yourself in this mode? Remember, you said this is important to you. I am trying to help you stay on task. I'm trying to help support you in moving towards your goal. And acknowledge this is not easy to make this change. You're going to stumble. I am not going to forsake you the first time you stumble, but I'm going to help get you back on track because I know you're capable of achieving this. I know you have the commitment. I know you have the desire. I know you have the specific goal. It's okay. You'll have ups and downs. So that's the whole part of today, really understanding the when, the why, and the how, understanding your process, the emotional process that leads to acquiring, and how to acknowledge those triggers, address them, and how to change those thoughts, and then how to find alternative source of enjoyment so you're not using acquiring to mitigate negative emotions or negative emotional vulnerability. You have alternatives that are healthy, meaningful, and goal-specific that can help you get there. And ultimately, get a coach. You want someone to help keep you pushing you in the direction, right? Help the person stay on task, provide emotional support, help with decision-making with questions, not making decisions for people. Ask the questions that inspire them to make decisions. Be a cheerleader. There are times when you will have to say, listen, you made a great effort today. You move one thing and put it away. It's okay. You've achieved something better than where you were yesterday. And then there's the don'ts. Don't make decisions for folks. Don't work beyond your capacity, which means if the person is struggling and you find it triggering you, step away. You can't be all things to all people. this is not the holy grail. This is one aspect of that person's life you're trying to help them. You need to understand your own limitations and be honest about it. Today is not a day I can be helpful. It's not working today. Let's try this again tomorrow. So, and I'm going to post the evaluation. What I want to certainly do is let you know that the next learning community is in September the 26th. And I'd ask if you can actually use the acquiring form, my acquiring form, the recent episode of acquiring form, advantages, disadvantages, non-acquiring card. I want you to use the non-acquiring help card for folks to use. That's going to be critical and important to do so. And I'm going to stop sharing because I want to post the evaluation so you can take a quick minute and provide us with some feedback so that we're able to ensure that the learning community is responding to your needs. And if there's any shift and change that you need us to make, we're happy to do so to make it more viable for you. But I want to wrap up today by thanking you for being here and spending your time with us. Certainly hope that the takeaway is one that you can use in your daily engagement, because at the end of the day, you have to practice this. People have to actually feel that it's meaningful and working for them in order for them to apply it and integrate it into their lives. But this is not an easy task. Anyone who told you helping someone with hoarding is going to be easy, we're lying to you, and I'm not going to do that. But it's possible. The skills are transferable. They've been tested. You can do it. Keep that in mind. But thank you very much. It's been a blast as usual. Look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great, great rest of the week. Absolutely, I better. I hope that things go well with you and your mom, yeah. And the information will be passed on, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Enjoy. Have a great rest of the week, folks.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Earl, there was some other links that you had available for us, like that card that we can
Yep.
pass on. Could you share those links?
There it is,
Oh.
Sheila.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, when they're sending out the today's presentation and the recording again, I will send the list of the links that you can get to these forums as well.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Not a problem at all. My pleasure.
Have a good day.
You too.